Hey guys, it's Kira and welcome to another video. Today I'm making a TBR that I actually can't believe it's already time to make, and that is all of the books that I really need to finish before the end of the year. And the reason I can't believe I'm already making this TBR is because, hello, how is it almost December? I fully do not know where this year has gone. It's been one of those very strange time warp kind of years where I was expecting the year to drag so slowly because of course most of the things that you usually fill your time with have kind of been taken away for a large portion of the year, and so I expected the year to go so slowly, and so it's actually gone really quickly. By just like a normal year standard, this year has flown by, which is kind of bizarre, and that means that it's almost December and I cannot believe it. Although I am very excited because I love Christmas and I'm so excited for this time of year. But with the end of the year in sight, it has been time to do a good old audit of my bookshelves and figure out which books I want to prioritize before the year is out. And so having looked at my TBR, I have selected 7 high priority books. Now I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to be able to finish way more than 7 books before the end of the year. But of course December is a busy time and who knows what's going to happen between now and the end of the year. So on the chance that I don't get to read as much as I'd like before the end of the year, these are the 7 books that I'm going to be giving the most highest priority to and focusing all my attention on finishing. So without further ado, let's jump into my end of year TBR. That sentence is so bizarre to say. So the first book on this list is a new release. It came out very recently and it has been so highly talked about and so loved. Everyone seems to be obsessed with this book and that has made me really excited to read it. I'm also so happy to be putting this on this TBR because I feel like if I read this book before the end of the year, I can actually count myself as having been in the hype, which, you know, isn't a major thing. I don't mind reading books after everyone else, but I do feel like I'm super notorious for reading books way after everyone else has kind of stopped caring about them. And although that doesn't negate from enjoying the experience yourself, I think there is something really nice about being able to enjoy that collective experience along with everyone else and just have that time where everyone is gushing over the same book. So with that in mind, the book on the TBR that I'm talking about is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, technically speaking, I have actually read 1 chapter of this book already because I featured this book in a try a chapter book tag that I did a couple of weeks ago, and I absolutely loved the first chapter. It was so intriguing and definitely set me up to want to read this book. The only reason I didn't choose this one out of that try a chapter tag was just because I needed to finish that book in like a day or two, and this one was about 200 pages longer than the book that I actually selected, which was Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and so I was still really excited to read this one, and it's definitely a high priority for me. All I understand about this book is that our main character, Addie LaRue, is kind of cursed in the sense that she can't tell people her real name and that people are basically destined to forget her. So she meets loads of people, lots of romantic interests who basically can enjoy her company for one night, but then the next morning they have no idea who she is. And so she is essentially destined to live this very lonely and almost invisible life where no one really knows who she is, and anyone that she does connect with will forget her inevitably. And I think there is meant to be a person in this book who she meets who somehow manages to get over that curse and remembers her, but I also see a lot of people talking about how this book makes them cry, and so I don't know what kind of roller coaster I'm getting myself in for, but I am very excited to find out. The next book on the TBR also happened to be part of that try a chapter tag. I promise there are other books on this TBR that weren't in that video, but this one was The Starless C by Erin Morgenstern. Now, if you've watched that try a chapter tag, you'll know that the reason I didn't continue on with this book at that time was because as soon as I finished the first chapter, this book just screamed cozy Christmas read to me. And there's no particular reason for that aside from Erin Morgenstern's incredible writing style. The book isn't particularly Christmassy in its subject matter. I don't think it's set at Christmas time or even in winter necessarily. However, having read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern and then just read the first chapter of this book, she has an incredibly vivid and just immersive writing style. And I feel like that just makes this book perfect for Christmas time because at the moment I'm obviously working, teaching yoga, and I'm generally quite busy, which means that I'm kind of reading bits of books here and there and just trying to fit it in around everything else. Whereas at Christmas time, I won't be at work for a few days because obviously we'll have the Christmas holiday off. I won't be teaching yoga because all of the studios will be closed for Christmas, which means I'll have way more time to fully dedicate myself to just getting lost in a good book. And this book just seems so perfect for that. I actually know very little about this book, and I think that's how I'd like it to stay because I don't think Erin Morgenstern's books are very easy to summarise. She writes in such an incredible way, but a lot of what makes her book so magical isn't necessarily even the plot, it's just the incredible way that she brings characters and locations to life. But what I understood from the very first chapter of this book is that it is set in a place called the Starless C, which is essentially a place or haven for book lovers, and it's all about stories and all of that kind of incredible stuff, and it sounds like a book about books, which I love. And then the blurb of this book says, Zachary Rawlins stumbles across a mysterious library book containing details from his own life among its pages, which leads him on a quest unlike any other. And that just sounds so intriguing, and I know I'm going to love this book, I absolutely do. But this one just seems like a perfect read to pick up during a cozy, wintry Christmas time day, and I am so excited for it. And then technically I do have one more book that I have already made a start on, and that book is It by Stephen King. Because nothing screams Christmas like Stephen King, am I right? Obviously, Stephen King isn't the most classically festive or cozy author to read. However, I am really excited to read this book, and although I am going to be reading a lot of these books around Christmas time, they're not necessarily all Christmas themed picks, they're just books I want to read by the end of the year. I actually did start this book on Halloween itself because it is the most perfect Halloween book, but I have so far only read 55 pages, and this book has about 1,100 pages. So I'm less than a tenth of the way through this massive book, and I am very excited to find out how this book pans out. Stephen King is an author that I have grown to love a lot over the past couple of years, and It was actually my very first ever Stephen King themed experience because I saw the old movie version of It from like the 80s back when I was like 12 years old, and I'm not gonna lie, it did scar me. Pennywise in that film is so scary, and I think there's something about it looking a little bit retro and a little bit kind of like just like haphazard that makes that film so terrifying in a way that I don't think the new, more polished and CGI version does like scare you. I don't know if that kind of comes down to the age that I was when I watched it versus the age I was when I saw the new one. But I just think that there's something about that old one that is truly terrifying, and it did scar me. But then over the past couple of years, I have delved into Stephen King's works, read some of his other books, and absolutely loved them. And like I mentioned, I have seen the newer versions of the It films, and that has sparked a desire in me to finally go back and conquer my first Stephen King-induced fear and read this book. And I'm very excited to see how it goes. Like I said, I've only read 55 pages, but I'm really enjoying it so far, and I'm very excited to see how this pans out and how it differs from the film because it is obviously gigantic. And although it's not a classically cozy or festive book, I do think that there is something kind of cozy about sitting inside with a really dark and creepy book on a day when it is really like cold, maybe even snowy outside, and just getting cozy while the world becomes wintry outside and you get cozy with a terrifying book inside. Don't know if that's just me, but either way, I am very excited to read this book and see how it goes. It will definitely be a book that I'm reading alongside others because of how big it is, but hopefully I finish it by the end of the year. The next book on this TBR is one that I really want to finish in order to complete a challenge that I set for myself earlier this year, and that book is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. At the beginning of 2020, I had read 3 out of Jane Austen's 6 complete novels. So I had read Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice, and Northanger Abbey. Then in spring of this year, I read Emma, which is by far my favourite Jane Austen novel. And then in the summer of this year, I read Sense and Sensibility. So that means that Mansfield Park is the last of Jane Austen's complete novels that I have to read in order to complete all of her books, and that is a challenge I really wanted to complete this year because it's just so exciting, and I'm then kind of planning to maybe go back and reread them in publication order and just see how I feel about them when I like change up the order, and maybe try to read them like in much closer proximity so I can get a real feel for which one is my true favourite. Although to be perfectly honest, I do feel like Emma is the one that I'm always going to love the most. But either way, I really want to read Mansfield Park so I can complete the reading experience of Jane Austen's novels, and I just can't wait. I actually know nothing about this book, but in all honesty, I've gone into all of Jane Austen's novels, aside from Pride and Prejudice, which is obviously just such a well-known story, not knowing anything really about the protagonist, about the story, and just going in completely blind, and I've still really enjoyed all of them. So I'm kind of going to keep that mystery alive with Mansfield Park and just read it and see what it's all about, and then of course I'll keep you updated with which one is my reigning favourite after I've completed my read of her entire complete novel collection. And I guess in a very similar vein to It by Stephen King, I also want to read Flowers in the Attic by Virginia Andrews, which could also be described as a slightly dark and strange pick for Christmas time, but either way I'm really intrigued about this book and want to read it as soon as possible. From what I understand, this is a book which focuses on 4 siblings who are locked in the attic by their mother. This happens after an accident which changes their lifestyle, and their mother just doesn't know what to do with them, and it's meant to be temporary at first, but I believe they are locked in that attic for years and years and years, and it just sounds very dark, very disturbing, and really, really interesting. So I'm really excited to read this one because I have no idea how it's going to be like told and what the situation is going to be like. I think it'll be really interesting because I'm assuming it'll be predominantly like set in one location, which I think is quite an interesting sort of framework for a book, and I'm just really intrigued to see what happens and how dark this book is because I've heard it is quite disturbing. Next up, we have a non-fiction book, a memoir that I'm really excited about. It's been sitting on my shelves for well over a year now, but I very recently heard some good things about it, and that kind of bumped it up my TBR, and that book is Stephen King on Writing. And I'm now realising this is probably the most Stephen King heavy, end of year, slightly festive themed TBR to ever exist. So I bought this book back in summer of 2019, so well over a year ago, because I was taking part in Camp NaNoWriMo last July, and I was really into like finding out more about writing, so I bought this book. Then I very quickly didn't write anything else and kind of forgot about this book. However, I've recently been watching a lot of videos from Noelle Gallagher. She is a fellow Stephen King fan, and she was recently writing a paper for her like graduate program all about Stephen King on writing, and she was talking about how it was such an interesting book. The front of this book describes it as part biography, part collection of tips for the aspiring writer, and the reason that I want to read this is less so for the tips on the aspiring writer part and more so for the biography of Stephen King, because he has had such an interesting life and is probably one of the most successful commercial writers ever to exist, and I just think finding out more about his story is going to be so interesting because he is just such an intriguing person, and I'm really excited to find out more. So I'm hoping it falls more into the biography side than the writing tips, but either way I'm sure it will be an interesting read. And then the final book on this TBR is one that I don't yet have my hands on, but I will be getting very, very soon and certainly reading before the end of the year, and that is In a Holidays by Christina Lauren. Now this is a new release for this year, and it is of course set at Christmas time, so it had to be included in this TBR because essentially if I don't read it this Christmas, I'll have to wait until next Christmas, and I don't want to do that because this sounds like such a fun Christmas book, and essentially it sounds like a Christmas Groundhog Day style book where our main character gets caught in this time loop and keeps repeating the same day over and over again, which I just think is such a fun concept for a book, and I absolutely cannot wait to get my hands on it because I just love Christmas. I've heard really good things about Christina Lauren. Christina Lauren is 2 authors, right? So I guess I've heard good things about their books, but I really wanted to read one, and this one seems like a perfect pick because I love Christmas, and what could be better than a fun Groundhog Day themed Christmas book to conclude the year of reading. So there we have it. Those are some of the books that I'm hoping to read before the end of the year, and I need you guys to hold me accountable. If you see me picking up other books first, tell me off, tell me to read these ones because I really, really want to get to them before the year is over. If you've set yourself an end of 2020 TBR yet, I would love to know what books you'll be prioritising, and if you've read any of the books that I'm going to be trying to read before the end of the year, I'd also love to know your thoughts on them too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.